what, 49% of people that you need to win over? What's my maths doing there?
No, 39%.
39%.
It's not often I get to correct you on the maths.
Check.
Look at this.
It's been such
Maths
an early morning.
2026. Maybe this is my new skill. The concept of trust brokering. So what Edelman is basically saying is rather than trying to force alignment between your people, start building the capacity and the capability to bridge difference. And I love that as a headline.
Yeah, I like it. And I like it because it makes sense, right? That capacity to bridge difference fits so nicely with all of those other good things that we know make good business. And we talk about time and time again. If you've listened to Watch the Pod before, you'll have heard us bang on about them. And welcome to the Deep Sea Dive, the place where we talk all things culture, change, communications, and coaching and leadership development. I am Lorna Leeson, and this is
the one and only Lottie Dahl.
The one, definitely.
I think there probably are more, but you'd have to go to kind of Norway or Sweden to find the rest of us.
Fun fact, and we're going to talk about AI a little bit later on, but there are two Lorna Leesons in the known world. If you Google, you will either find me or you'll find a very lovely South African horse whisperer.
Nice.
And she's the more famous Lorna Leeson. Or ChatGPT will conflate the two of us. So if you actually ask ChatGPT about Lorna Leeson, I will train you with horses and she will coach you. It's wonderful. Anyway, why are we here? We're not here to talk about you or me or how famous we are on AI. We are here to talk about the Edelman Trust Barometer. The Edelman, not the Edelweiss Trust Barometer.
We've already got that singing out of our system, so
we have. I'm not even going to do it.
We're so tempted.
It's a compulsion. We're going to talk about the Edelman Trust Barometer. What is the Edelman Trust Barometer? I hear you cry. I did not know the answer to this until I started working with the indomitable Lottie Dahl. Lottie's going to explain what that is in just a minute. In my view, it's a really, really valuable tool for leaders and business, but it's not obviously, when you first hear about it, a valuable tool. So we're going to spend a little bit of time digging through it. There are lots of stats in this episode. It's a report and a set of data that is packed with stats. And so for that reason, we come armed with notes. We're not even going to apologise. We're going to be referring to notes because there's a lot in this that we want to try and get through. We'll see how well we do with that. I'm going to give you 3 stats right now. The 3 stats that I think are kind of big headlines on this for me, and then we'll get into a lot more of it in a bit more detail. 70% of us are hesitant or unwilling to trust someone who is different from us. Just let that sink in. Only 32% of us believe that the next generation is going to be better off than we are. And the gap between people on high incomes and low incomes in terms of how much trust they have in the institutions of the world, places like governments, media, journalists, organisations, has nearly tripled in the last decade, which means it's got so much bigger, that gap between if you're a high earner or a low earner and how much you actually trust the institutions around us. So that sounds like a political story, but we think it's a leadership story, and we're going to make the case as to why that is, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to talk about actually what the Edelman Trust Barometer is, and I came across it, I think probably about 6 years ago now. I was wanting to write a paper about organisational trust. And when I was out there looking for sources, I stumbled across the Edelman Trust Barometer that over the years for us has become absolute gold dust for the way that we work and the way that we advise our clients. So kind of what is it? It's a global survey that's been going for 26 years. It surveys around 34,000 people across 28 countries. So it's a seriously robust piece of research. And what it does is it tracks trust across 4 major institutions, essentially. So business, government, media, and NGOs. And it looks at how trust shifts in relation to those 4 institutions over time, and then comes up with some really great headline insights and then practical ways that business in particular can start to address some of those trust issues. Look at trust in government, for example. Really, really interesting when you track trust in government over the past 5-6 years since COVID, for example. Actually, during COVID, trust in government was pretty high. And over the years, you've seen that trust decline as a result of geopolitical tensions, the way the COVID pandemic was handled. Really fantastic stuff. So for us, it's absolute gold dust for ourselves and our clients, because it really helps us advise our clients when they're shaping their culture, when their leadership is trying to communicate and drive trust with their organisations and leadership strategy. When you start to think about this headline, you realise actually that the result of what's happened over the past 5 years has really led to what they're calling the trust amid insularity. So the stats that you mentioned are the core ones, but the report is absolutely packed with insights that I said absolute gold dust for leaders in what they're going to do amidst this new trust of insularity, which is why I love it so.
Yeah. I mean, I love, you know, that I love a data set, right? And it's been really hard to pick which data we put into this. And trust amidst insularity, that word is so accurate for me. And I think some of the things you were just talking about that the report talks about, they're kind of obvious when we reflect on them. They're things that we talk about all the time. So COVID, and then some of the impacts of work after COVID, so particularly working from home and the way that we work changing, working on teams, so much being physically disconnected from people. We'll come back to that later. Then you've got bigger things like global unrest, which I think is on a scale that lots of us really haven't seen in our lifetimes. Social media, the rise of social media in the past 10 years, all of those things creating this kind of sense of insularity. And so for me, I can think off the top of my head of lots and lots of implications for leaders and business, which is really where we want to tie this back to. Yeah. And according to Edelman, this is here to stay, right? And it's going to get worse. But this theme, Lottie, I was just thinking back to our Walk the Plank episode at the end of last year. We talked about the things that we want to put in the bin. Yeah. And this idea of us all being in our own bubbles, those insularity bubbles, was your walk the plank, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I described it as kind of how binary we'd become. But actually, the Edelman report talks about it in terms of us being in our information bubbles. Right, these self-enforcing information bubbles that the algorithm just feeds us. I mean, you can see so clearly. I mean, the report's fascinating. Insularity is absolutely where we are in terms of who and what we trust. So if we just look in terms of, the report breaks it down into kind of 3 core elements of what this kind of trust in insularity means. It's a real polarisation, so a belief that our countries are divided and these divisions are entrenched, you know, and we've seen this in the UK time and time again, haven't we? You know, the misinformation that social media creates. I mean, just look back to the Stockport riots. Created by social media bubbles, by misinformation, by this kind of entrenched belief that we've sort of got this us versus them mentality, which ties into grievance, this sense of resentment amongst a growing proportion of people towards the system that feels rigged against them. I mean, the reaction to the migrants in hotels, for example, this whole idea of like life is really unfair. And insularity, a reluctance from a large number of us to trust anyone who's different. And I think, you know, when you're under threat, the threat response means, and we know this, that where's our focus? It's on ourselves. Right? So, you know, what leaders are dealing with, kind of political divides, culture divides, and a really big one for us, less tolerance at work. And again, the reaction to ED&I. Right? This whole less tolerance for difference, this whole like, let's just shut ourselves down and put ourselves into these bubbles has now created what Edelman calls insularity with trust.
Yeah, absolutely. If trust, as Lencioni would say, is the foundation of high-performing teams and organisations, then, you know, there's a huge implication there for business, isn't there? And for me, and I know it was for you because this was kind of where you went in, you kind of, I was sitting there wearing bells on my head and you were kind of giving this very sober sort of state of the nation.
It was a moment. This was our Christmas special, by the way, for people who are going, what is Walk the Plank?
What is Walk the Plank?
What is Walk the Plank?
Yeah, we weren't sure and we were in it. So
there was a lot of baubles being thrown in all directions and some silly hats whilst I was trying to deliver quite a serious message.
Sobering, right? Depressing almost. Depressing almost. And the more depressing thing is that we can see why it's true. You've just articulated it, and I think about social media, for example. So I had a really interesting experience a couple of months back where both myself and my other half, Alex, who we exchanged. Hi, Alex.
If you're still listening
Alex.
to our podcast.
He's not. No, we're at that point now.
Alex.
I know. It's a little Easter egg to see if he is. What was I talking about? Alex and so we send little memes on Instagram back and forth, right? That's how old we are. So we communicate by little Instagram reels or memes. And after a while we were like, why are yours? I don't see that one. Why do you see this one? And of course now he gets cats and I get golf. So it's all evening out. But for a while our timelines were so different because the bubbles that we existed in online were so different. And that for me is just one example of how this insularity can be created, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Insularity in reality and insularity online as well. So what people are doing is they're all seeing different facts. So they're creating different villains. They're thinking there are different solutions. And what they're obviously now doing is they're bringing that back into the workplace. And actually, interestingly, Edelman's got a whole section on social media's power to transfer trust to influencers. So it shows how trust is travelling more now through relationships actually than institutions, which is a real shift from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
That's really interesting. It's that kind of sense of I trust the people that are close to me rather than the institutions on which some of this, we've
relational.
always had trust. It's absolutely relational. So one thing that struck me reading that bit of the report, right, and I've got some more stats here, so I am going to keep looking down because they're not wedged in my mind yet. Edelman has data about what this means in practice. They asked questions, in fact, in the survey about people who worked in organisations, and they asked them what they thought about businesses and CEOs generally, and they asked them about what they thought about their employer and their CEO specifically, as well as governments, media, journalists, NGOs, other institutions. So here's two that stood out for me. Remember we talked at the top of the pod about 70% of us are unwilling or hesitant to trust people who we feel are different to ourselves. So 42% say they'll put less effort into helping a team leader in their own organisation if they felt that their beliefs or views differed from their own. So 42, almost half, wouldn't follow a leader if they felt their beliefs were different to their own. 34% would rather switch departments than report to a manager who they felt had different values to their own.
Staggering.
More than a third would rather switch department. I've never, in all of my years of working in organisations with engagement around culture, leadership, seen stats that stark. And I think it's getting worse. So how do you lead or motivate or create high-performing teams if you have to navigate the fact that amongst the teams that you lead, they might not trust each other and they might not even trust you as a leader simply because of these reality bubbles, these insular bubbles that we have? I mean, who do we trust? Who do we trust?
No, exactly. Trust is going local. Trust is my circle, and that's where the trust is sitting. That's kind of got pros and cons for businesses. So what Edelman is saying is while we're distrusting of difference, and that's a risk for business and leaders, trust is increasingly proximal. So the 70% of us who are more insular, i.e. the less trusting of difference, 60, and this is the positive in amongst all this negative that we're talking about at the minute, 61% still trust their own CEO, and that's on par with their own neighbours. So we trust people we know, we trust people who are close to us.
So we trust our own CEO as much as we trust our neighbours. Yeah. And that's one of the highest, right, of all of the people groups or individuals that we're likely to trust.
Yeah, and trust in business still outperforms all of those other three institutions, government, NGOs and media.
Yeah, so big positives there, right? Yeah. And it is a big positive if you're a CEO.
Yeah.
I guess there's a few things to think about, and this is the thing about data, right? Firstly, that's still 39% of people that you still need to win over. Yeah. So without wanting to be a negative Nelly, if that's 61 who trust their CEO, you've still got nearly 40% of people that you need to win over. And I suppose this is the sobering bit for me more broadly, right? And you just touched on this. If you compare that trust in your own CEO to government leaders and journalists, only 48% of us trust journalists and only 43% of us trust government leaders. So we are more likely to distrust journalists and government leaders and certainly to trust them almost 20 percentage points less than our own CEO. That's just two pillars of our democracy, no biggie.
Yeah. But again, I absolutely lay the fault at social media for this. Again, I was listening to a BBC podcast the other day, and it was reflecting back on the Stockport riots, and the Stockport riots were out there publicly denouncing the BBC. So the people who were rioting were denouncing the BBC, saying they said we are now the media.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? So the data is telling us that we trust people we know, which, as you say, includes influencers that we see on social media and our friends on social media because we think we know them. They're in our timeline, more than institutions. So if you're a CEO today, to your point, then people you lead, they trust you more than they trust the BBC and the Prime Minister. Just let that
sink in, and that's a responsibility, but also it's an opportunity and a mandate.
Yeah, it is, and we'll come back to that. I guess but there's a little caveat, right? A little asterisk here, because the data is data nerd alert, right? But the data is interesting. We don't trust all CEOs and organisations. So because of that proximity factor, the further away they get from us, not my CEO, a general organisation, a general CEO, heaven forbid a foreign organisation or a foreign CEO, the trust declines and declines. So just think about what that means if you're a global leader. Or in the instance of some organisations that we know, a new business may be acquiring another business. So trust in our own employers sits at 78%. That's brilliant. That's outperforming what we know about engagement stats generally. That's brilliant. But trust in business generally drops to 64%. And for NGOs, the media and government, our trust in them as institutions sits around 50%. It's 50-50 whether we trust them or not. So at best, people are a bit about those organisations, right? And I guess putting all the societal and political stuff aside, this has got employer brand issues. If you are in NGOs, government, media, and people are less likely to trust you, how do you hire in the future? How do you paint yourself as an organisation that purpose-led Gen Z wants to go and work for? Engagement, how do you get them to stick around and want to work for you? And then just leadership issues. So I don't know, I'm a little bit nihilistic about all of this by this point. So, should we just give up now? Are CEOs the future? Aren't 40% of CEOs supposed to be psychopaths, Lottie? What? I'm so confused. Help! Who do we trust? What's going on?
Well, I'm no psychotherapist, but I can probably name a few. Just for the record, none of the lovely CEOs that we work for, obviously. But Edelman does have data that points to answers
on the psychopathic CEOs.
Sadly, no.
Okay.
But if you are a non-psychopathic CEO or leader or people team, there are things that you can do. And if we're going to be smug, they are all kind of sensible, practical, achievable things that we talk about all the time. So enter stage right, the concept of trust brokering. So what Edelman is basically saying is, rather than trying to force alignment between your people, start building the capacity and the capability to bridge difference. And I love that as a headline.
Yeah, I like it. And I like it because it makes sense, right? That capacity to bridge difference fits so nicely with all of those other good things that we know make good business. And we talk about time and time again. If you've listened to watch the pod before, you'll have heard us bang on about them.
And when Edelman looked at people who do trust someone different from them, they gave a few key reasons, which I think are really important to share. When there's difference, if someone has an open mind and they don't try to change me, they're 49% more likely to trust them. This is a real personal mantra for me as well. And I really think this will help solve so many of this binary divide. If people just have an open mind and they try and understand me, don't try and change me, but just understand where my points of view may have come from. They're transparent about how they differ from me. And really interesting, they've helped me in the past, 24%. So they're more likely to help someone, trust someone if they help in the past. And again, this might make sense because actually, once you actually begin to see someone as a human and not as a label and not as a binary and not in a box and not in a bubble, then that trust begins to be brokered. And the people who were surveyed were asked about specific interventions, and this is really relevant for leaders that could help build trust in business.
Yeah, and I think one of them is quite controversial, isn't it? We didn't love it.
We didn't love it. And again, and I'm always really happy to have my mind changed about things, right? I'm really happy to kind of hear a new fact, a new bit of data, and kind of get it to get myself to rethink. Then 74% of people say that bringing people into work who are different from them and gathering people together back in the workplace would be effective.
Yeah, which is quite annoying for all those people who've championed working from home as part of flexibility and inclusion and all kinds of good reasons, right?
Yeah.
But the data doesn't lie. And it's actually a really good example of the law of unintended consequences. Like, we did that for good reason. We kept doing it for good reason. Yeah. And yet here, very starkly in the data, is an unintended and real consequence of not being physically together.
Absolutely. And do you know what? When we read the report and we started to think about everything that's happened in the past, it all begins to just slot into place. It's a little bit of like, oh right.
Yeah.
People working from home, of course you're insular, right? Of course you're just in your own little bubble. You're physically in your own bubble, right? If not even mentally in your own bubble. So getting people back into the office and bridging those differences by having people collaborate together.
Yeah, let me tell you, this was music to Alex, my partner's ears, because he's a big advocate for physically being in the same workplace. And we've had a few debates about it. And when he read this report over my shoulder the other day, he was a little bit smug because this is something he's intuitively felt, I think, for quite a while. I just think it's beautiful.
Yeah. And actually, I was reflecting on the way up here today. We know that clients have lots of network communities which champion their own specific difference or diversity. Do you know what? I was just wondering, are there any opportunities in those organisations where they've got these cross-network groups? So rather than 8 network communities, each championing their own causes, really, I think organisations should be looking to create these kind of cross communities where people are really learning from each other and sitting there and understanding each other's differences.
And we have like one brain. We say this so often.
Were you thinking
have one
that?
brain. I was thinking that last night.
Wow.
I was thinking that last night.
That's amazing.
And it's another one of those unintended consequences, right?
Yes.
It's good intent to bring people together.
Yeah.
From areas that maybe are underrepresented or disadvantaged, or we want to encourage to be represented more in business, and yet the unintended consequences, we've created these little silos, these more bubbles. And the question is, how do you create a place where people can feel they belong and also bridge difference,
and a place where people feel safe to express themselves? Going back to that statistic, I will trust someone who has an open mind if they don't try and change my mind.
Yeah.
About understanding. There are other things that all of those 34,000 people surveyed said would help too. And unsurprisingly, in top place for me is promote a shared identity and culture to remind people of what unites them. Culture and values, people. Culture and values.
It's just perfect, isn't it? It's like we wrote that part. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of confirmation bias going on here with us in terms of we've read it and that's why we love it so much. But the facts are the facts. I also really like the fact, coming back to your point about, okay, so we've maybe got these, different groups, employee representation groups or networks, and we're bringing people together and they're very different. What people might be nervous about that. So the data, the surveyed 34,000 people also said that 80% of them felt that training people in how to have difficult conversations, how to bridge conflict would work. And we know how important that is. We do it a lot. And 82%, back to your point, say that bringing diverse teams together to solve problems, to work on specific projects, not just to solve this kind of challenge actually, but just to do work, will build trust as well. So in other words, have this clear set of values and shared values and identity. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is how we do things around here, as we always say. People are really clear about. And we've been in organisations going through tough times where they've got those shared values, and we've seen that so vividly.
Oh my goodness.
haven't we?
And then we've seen other examples where they are lip service and just simply values on the wall.
Chisel has hit the fan.
Right.
Yeah.
And we genuinely know that when an organisation's leadership embodies those values, demonstrates those behaviours, that the trust in that organisation rises. We've got the data on an individual organisational basis to prove that.
Absolutely. And we haven't got time to go into, oh my God, I wish we could do this like a 22-hour, like a Joe Rogan length episode.
Yeah.
We don't want to mention his name on this podcast ever again. But if we had a little bit longer, I would sneak in the fact that when something like the Stockport riots happens, there is a big event or a big polarising issue, a societal issue, people's trust in leaders will rise when they act in accordance with their values, with the stated organisational values. So, but anyway, just to come back to that, have a clear set of shared values and identity, bring different people together physically and to work on projects, and then equip people to have those tools to navigate conflict, have courageous conversations, which is what we call them.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, trust grows when people are listened to. Trust grows when leaders don't try to change people. They just want to understand them better. Where there's transparency, where there's shared identity, and where people are actually physically brought together rather being left in their bubbles. We've written a thought paper on this because we love this subject more than... I was going to say life itself, but that's an exaggeration. It's not true because we love life. And so there's a great thought paper that we're going to publish in the next
who knows?
Who knows when we get round to it, and we'll pack it full of loads more stuff, and a really good set of, I think, really practical, kind of almost like a playbook for CEOs. I think is what we're going to do with that.
Yeah, there's so much practical application for this. This is
Absolutely.
not esoteric, kind of intellectual stuff. This is the challenge. Here's the data, and then what can you do? What can you do? I've got time to squeeze one more
Go on, then.
Thought/stat.
Go on then.
You know me so well.
Commission.
This just struck me right. So if 70% of us, just to bring us back to the stat from the top of the episode, are hesitant to trust people who are different from us, and we're all sitting in our own individual trust bubbles, and trusting government and media is about 50-50, right? Then your workplaces, they're not just about work and productivity, are they? They are literally one of the last places left where people might actually have to sit next to somebody who's different from them. And that's uncomfortable and it's unusual. But boy, is that what the world needs right now. 75% of us think that their employer has an obligation to be this trust broker that you talked about. And 73% think that CEOs in general have an obligation. So they are looking at you and thinking, is this something a CEO or an employer should be tackling? And the answer is yes. But when they were asked, do you think yours is, and do you think businesses in general are, the answer in the majority was no.
Yeah.
So there's a gap there. There's an opportunity and a gap there, right? Whether you asked for it or not, leadership has that obligation now.
Yeah, and what we're not saying is become a moral referee or a political commentator, right? It's about that mandate to keep building that culture where people can disagree, people can be different, but still work together really well. You know, trust brokering sounds grand, but actually it's just really human, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, isn't it just kind of be a decent, brave, courageous, compassionate human? And you know we like those two words because they're two of our values. But in this world that's kind of shifting towards us and them, those organisations that can find a way of talking about we and how we are together, even when we disagree, you're going to outperform.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what the data is saying. And you might think that sounds idealistic, but the facts are the facts. And so here's one that I think might convince you. Those low-income groups that we talked about having dropped their trust in institutions so significantly, they asked those people in those groups if institutions took these actions that we've talked about, so trust brokering actions, how much more would you trust them? And trust jumps by 18 points when they do that. So it's not pink and fluffy, right? No. There's opportunity there. So if you lead people well, you are already holding more trust than most institutions in society. So you need to use it well. I love shoehorning a popular, culture reference in here, right? And I love this quote. I say it in coaching. Spider-Man's uncle is the source of this quote. And he says, and I would say this to leaders, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, and with proximity comes possibility.
As said by the great Lottie Dahl.
There you go, me and Spider-Man. Like
Spider-Man's uncle.
Oh, sorry, Spider-Man's uncle. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much. That was, well, I love it. I love it. You love it. We're going to keep sharing this with our clients.
Yeah.
Because we know that understanding this can really help them make a real difference. And you know what? Not just for them, but kind of for society. There's a bigger purpose to all this now.
Yeah, that's my main takeaway, is that whether you want it or not, leaders can't hide behind, this is just my job.
Absolutely. There you go. The takeaway for today. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.